One of the most consistent complaints that I hear about transport for London is that it's pretty expensive. Now, as anyone who has moderated a YouTube comment section can tell you, complaints are not always reasonable. But in this case, the complaint is backed up by data. Actually, it's been reported by TfL themselves. A report issued by them last year, based upon data from Imperial College London, found that fares per kilometre in London are more than double the worldwide average for cities. It's not an ideal situation, especially when people are being encouraged not to work from home and to ditch their cars. So why are TfL fares so expensive? Well, simple answer. Unlike most cities, the majority of TfL's income comes from fares. Over 70%, in fact. Other major cities like Hong Kong, Paris and New York tend to subsidise their transport systems to a far greater extent. Fares in those cities tend to cover around 30 to 40% of income. Now, I'm not good with numbers, as 127% of viewers surveyed would agree, but that seems like a very significant difference. The argument for subsidising fares is that public transport is an investment. If people can travel easily around the city, it boosts the economy. It takes cars off the road, which reduces pollution and means that essential road journeys can be made more easily. So, why don't we do it in London? Well, if you're a regular viewer on this channel, you may have anticipated that my answer has something to do with history, and it has something to do with politics. And it has something to do with technology. And, oh, I don't know, I'm sure we can find a way to fit Charles Tyson Yerkes in there, we usually can. In 1933, the public transport services of London were unified into a single public body under the control of the London Passenger Transport Board, known operationally as London Transport. This was done for various reasons. It meant that the profitable parts of the network could prop up the unprofitable parts. And it meant that different forms of transport could cooperate rather than compete. And it meant that modernisation could be carried out at the behest of a central authority, which in many places was badly needed. There was a reluctance to change things up too much, and there was a lot of resistance to full nationalisation, both from the unions and from the shareholders. The situation with public transport in London at the start of the 1930s was this. Mainline railways were not London-specific and so did not count. The big cheese was Underground Electric Railways of London, an organisation set up at the beginning of the century by Edgar Speyer and Charles Tyson Yerkes, there he is. This acquisitive company owned most of the underground lines in London. The main exception was the Metropolitan Railway. UERL also owned a number of bus companies, most prominently the huge London General Omnibus Company. And they owned three major tram operators, London United, Metropolitan Electric and South Metropolitan. Most of the other transport operators were small fry by comparison. And to be honest, UERL had been doing a pretty good job with their transport services. They were well integrated, with buses, trams and underground trains feeding into each other, which provided a comprehensive service. But UERL and the other operators were companies with shareholders who had to be compensated. These were wealthy and influential people. Also influential were the unions, who didn't want the management structure to change too much. So rather than the shareholders simply being bought out, their shares in the old companies were exchanged for shares in London Transport. Very much a case of meet the new boss, same as the old boss. In theory, the local authorities of London should have had a significant amount of power in this new organisation. Remember that I said that most of the operators were small fry. I very deliberately didn't say all, because many of the trams in London were operated by the local authorities. The London County Council, which was the governing body for London at the time, owned many miles of track, including much of the track in central London. With them having that large a chunk of the network, you'd think they'd have a lot of say, but no. The reason being that by the 1930s, trams were on the way out. They didn't have the flexibility of buses, and in many cases they were embarrassingly dilapidated. The policy was to replace them with diesel buses or trolley buses. And since the local authorities didn't operate buses, diesel or trolley, their influence was reduced to basically nil. This was deliberate. The Transport Minister, Herbert Morrison, was very much opposed to municipal control, which seems a bit odd for a man who was both a Labour Party minister and the former head of the London County Council, but there you go. So, as of 1933, London had a municipal transport authority that was basically unconnected to the wider municipal authority, which meant that it would have to pay for itself, as it had done when it was a bunch of private companies. And it never got out of that habit, despite many changes of ownership. So that's why TfL fares are so high. It's because of Herbert Morrison, it's because of Underground Electric Railways of London, and it's because of a bunch of dilapidated trams. Well, I hope you enjoyed this expensive tale from the tube. If so, please do leave a like and consider subscribing for more. I would like, as always, to thank my donors on Ko-fi, on Patreon, and here on YouTube for your generous support. You are the London Transport shares to my UERL shares. And I will see you all again very soon for another Tale from the Tube.